Today we're going to look at subtracting rational numbers. We're going to apply what we learned about subtracting integers to subtracting rational numbers. It's no different. We're going to take a look at our terms. We're not going to think of it as subtraction. We're going to think of it as being a negative or the opposite or subtract. They all mean the same thing. But when we look at these, we're going to circle our terms again. So in number 1, you have 12.5. That is your first term. And then in the second half of that, you have a negative 15.3. So now we're going to go back to what we learned about subtracting integers. So I have a positive 12.5. I have a negative 15.3. So when we put a positive and negative together, just like when we add integers, we're actually going to subtract the two. So what you always want to do with decimals, though, is you want to put the larger absolute value on top. So in this instance, it's the 15.3. You know you're going to be subtracting these two values because one's positive, one's negative. So when you put it together, you have to take away some integers. So if you have 15.3, and then you're going to subtract from that 12.5. When you subtract decimals, make sure you line your decimal point up. So here we make that the 13. We have to borrow. So 13 minus 5 is 8. Drop down your decimal point. 4 minus 2 is 2. So we have 2.8. Now go back to the original problem. So you have a positive 12.5, you have a negative 15.3. Who has the greater absolute value, or who has more of those integer chips? Is it a positive 12 or a negative 15? Well, it's a negative 15. Therefore, you're going to have more negatives left over. So your answer is actually just going to be negative 2.8. So in number 2, we're going to take a look at that. Then we're going to circle our terms again. So in this first piece, you have a negative 8.15. And then in this second piece, you have a minus negative. So remember again, subtraction can mean the opposite. So it's like saying I have the opposite of a negative, which creates that positive. So it's like minus negative creates that positive. So here we actually have negative 8.15 plus 4.3. So again, just like in number 1, you have one value that's negative, one value that's positive. You have to put them together. So we're going to actually subtract the two absolute values. 8.15 has a greater absolute value, so subtract 4.3 from that. Remember to line up your decimals, annex any zeros that you have to. And now we can subtract. 5 minus 0 is 5. We're going to borrow, make it a 7, make that 11. So 11 minus 3 is 8. Drop down the decimal. And then 7 minus 4 is 3. Again, we're going to go back up to the original problem and say, who has more? Well, we have more negatives than we do positives. So my answer is going to be, again, like in number 1, negative 3.85. Same exact concept applies to fractions. Okay? But the first thing we have to remember with fractions is creating that common denominator. So in number 1 here, we have negative 7/8 minus 5/12. Your common denominator here is going to be 24. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this one by 3 over 3. Okay, and I'm going to multiply this one by 2 over 2. So multiply them by that common value. So next, I'm going to rewrite. So negative 7 times 3 is going to give me that negative 21 over 24. I'm going to bring up, I like to just put that up top a little bit. So this minus sign, I like to just kind of push it up a bit. So 5 times 2 is 10 over 24. So just like in adding integers, adding fractions, we're going to only take a look at our numerators. And I'm going to circle my terms again. So in this first one, I have a negative 21. In the second term, I have a negative 10. Put your terms together. So you have a negative 21 and a negative 10. When I put those together, it gives me a total of, since they're both negative, negative 31 over 24. The next thing we have to do is make this this is an improper fraction, so we have to make it a mixed number. 24 goes into 31 one time, and then 31 minus 24 is 7 over 24. Because it was negative 31 over 24, this just becomes negative 1 and 7/24, so that negative sign carries on. So in number 4, what you see is that one of these is a mixed number and one is just a proper fraction. So again, we're not going to really do much different in terms of looking at the terms. Okay, so the first one's going to be negative 5 1/4, but we are going to change that to an improper fraction. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21. So it's negative 21 over 4. And I'm actually going to look at this and say, all right, well, minus that negative, so negative, negative, makes it a big positive. So it's going to be a big positive 3/4. Would you look at that? I already have a common denominator. So I'm going to take a look at my numerators. I'm going to circle my terms. Negative 21, positive 3. I'm going to put those two together. I get a negative 18 out of 4. So we're going to make that a mixed number. So I'm going to reduce it and just say 9 out of 2. So it's like the same thing as saying 9 out of 2. So that's going to be negative 4 1/2. Okay, so I just created negative 18/4 as a mixed number. Again, just like with integers, we can apply this to word problems. And I lost my word problems. Here we go. Your bank account has a balance of negative $312.15. If you deposit $250, what is your new balance? Some kids will say to me, oh, that looks so weird that it's like a negative $312.15. What this means is that you actually overdrew your account. So you took out more money than you actually have. That's not good. So what we do then is we're going to deposit money into that account. So when you deposit money, it's adding that money to it. Okay, so if your bank account has a balance of negative $312.15 and you deposit $250, that means I'm adding $250 to it. So we're going to use the same principles we learned with subtracting and adding and apply them to these word problems. So here you have a positive and a negative. So I know I'm going to subtract the two. So I get 312.15 minus 250. Okay. And then when we subtract these, we're going to get $62.15. And because the negative value there's more negatives in this problem than positives, the balance is still going to be in the negative, but you're getting closer to coming out of the hole. So you're left with a negative $62.15 balance. So when you are subtracting any type of number, any type of real number, we're going to use those rules that we learned with integers, where we're going to just look at it and we're going to circle those terms. Like in this first problem here, it was looking at the negative 21 and a negative 10. And then we're going to go back and apply our rules for adding integers.